Welcome to the Seven Ways Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the Seven Ways book. I welcome all comments and questions at rabbibailey@thesevenways.com. My name is Ian Yehoshua Mordechai Bailey, and in this podcast, we come to the final step in our awesome spiritual journey. We have seen the Sefiras HaKalim. We've seen the Kabbalistic approach to how the world is like a broken vessel, disjointed parts. We've gone through Chesed and Gevura and Sefiras, Netzach, and Hod to see how all the different Klal and Prat, how all the different groupings and individual components can be polished through metaphor, education, caring, connection to the spiritual, and so on. We've seen how Yesod, as a Midah, has brought all those disparate parts together. And today we speak about Malchus, that the parts are tightly together. The Sefer Shari Ora says that just as a crown fits tightly upon the head of a king, so is the Midah of Malchus. All of the pratim, all of the components are tightly together back into a unique Malchus Kalal. All the pratim are tightly together as a crown. And David HaMelech and his ancestor and his progeny are the paradigms for Malchus. On the one hand, Malchus can be very strong and dominating. On the other hand, Malchus can only come after other midos, the other attributes and methodologies, have given birth to it. We see this with David HaMelech. He waits until the right time to be the king. However, he's extremely strong and dominant, just as Yehuda. In Shul, there's someone that sits near me who says, Yehuda is the man, David is the man. And while it's true that they present with their tremendous strength and save the day in that moment, there's an idea, Ein Melech Bali Am, and Malchus is described as having nothing of its own. This means that the king really only functions as an executor of the will of the people. He is an abstract person idea. He is really the servant of the people. He doesn't really possess anything. As the Malbim writes, someone who is domineering and dominating as a king is called a moshel. And someone who is a melech is ruling with the consent of the people. In this context, this means that all of the people have gotten together to create the right system for a functional king. As we talked about Sefer Shoftim, there was no melech in Israel. They were not able to go through the 7 spiritual steps to get to Malchus, the 6 leading up to Malchus and Malchus itself. So there's a famous Gemara that's used in the context of Malchus, Chulin Nun Zayin, Amud Beis. They said that Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta was a busy engager in things. What does it mean he was busy engaging in things? Rabbi Mashiach says in Mishlei Vav Vav, go to the ant, you lazy, see his ways and get smart. He has no chief, officer, or ruler, Moshel, the key word. And don't forget, prepare your bread in the summer. In other words, act like these proficient, hardworking ants. Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta said, I'm going to go see and make sure they don't really have a king. He went in the summer and spread his cloak over the anthill. One of them came out, and Rabbi Shimon put a mark on him. He went back in and told the other ants that the shade had befallen them. They exited the hill and came and lifted off the cloak. The sun fell on the hill. The ants fell upon the one ant and killed him. Rabbi Shimon said, I see from this day they do not have a king, because if they had one, would they not have taken permission from the king to kill? Because if anyone would deride his friend would kill him. Rashi. Rav Acha said, perhaps there was a king with them who ordered death, or maybe they received permission from the king, or maybe they were between kings. As it says in Shoftim, In those days there was no king in Israel. Each man would do what is fitting on his own eyes, rather rely on the reliability of Shlomo HaMelech, who wrote Mishlei, that the anthill indeed has no direct ruler, yet there's a queen ant. So the idea is that all of those ants are the pratim. This is a key muscle. All the ants are the components of the entity. If you took all the ants away and put new ants, you would still have quote unquote anthill. If you move those ants somewhere else to a different anthill, you'd still have an anthill. The entity, the country, the Malchus, the organization exists as a sum total of the interactions and parts that it has. Boom. And the king is not supposed to be domineering and dominating. Unfortunately, in most of history, the vast majority of kings have been this fashion. But we had a taste of the proper Malchus with David and Melech and Shlomo, some other kings. And today we will argue it is truly the best leadership, even though we don't have it. So let us start with Malchus-Chesed, Malchus-Gevura. Malchus-Chesed, unmitigated power, and Malchus-Gevura, control over this power, over this government, over having all the pratim in one's discretion. You know, there are different styles of strategy when it comes to war, or even simulated war, the sports battlefield. One approach is to create an game plan that one sticks to, and the weakness of that is, what do you do when the enemy adapts and messes with your plan? You have to adapt, but you're set with your plan. The other approach is to prepare, to wait and go to the weakness of the enemy. This is the difference between what a Yesod Mida might look like, the first one creating a strong game plan within itself, and Malchus. Malchus is a feminine word. And I once heard someone give a lecture that Malchus is feminine, and they went with this sort of literal understanding that what does it mean if it's female? So I personally don't think that Malchus is like pink and sugar and spice and everything nice and has the feminine gevura, the certain type of strength of women, etc. I don't think it means it's feminine. I believe that Kabbalah consistently, and Midrashim, Kabbalah and Midrashim consistently use metaphor to give us a deeper understanding, because metaphor can bridge the gap between us and deep ideas when you can't really express them. So, and they can be handed down over generations more easily. If you understand the mashal, you can remember the stories, and then you can expound them, juice the meaning out of them for deep meaning. So, Malchus being feminine, it doesn't mean it's womanly. It means it's nekeva, it's receiving, a receptacle. In other words, the universe is made of zachar and nekeva, plugging something into the wall, putting a nail into the board. The world works through something protruding and something receiving. So, in terms of Malchus, it can receive all of the different pratim within it. It is more adaptable. Think the art of war, Sun Tzu. Sun Tzu talks about feigning weakness, tricking your enemy, and then going for the kill at the right time. To make it less serious and about death, a sports team will do extra practice, and they will look for the weakness in the enemy, and they'll totally change their game plan in order to exploit it. There was one team, in football, you throw the ball, you run the ball, trick plays. There was one team that ran the ball a disgusting amount of times during a game, obsessive, and they were able to win. No one expected that. That was the weakest point. Other times, they threw the ball, crossing routes, this and that. Both teams won championships, but the Malchus-style team won more. Similar to basketball, certain teams winning in the 90s, one time versus 0 times, etc., etc. Email me for more of those specificities. But, Malchus needs to have a strong expression at the right time. So Chesed Sheba Malchus, unmitigated power, that's when David HaMelech goes out. Beginning of his life, Chesed Sheba Malchus. That's always the first step in these great shepherds' lives. And he's able to take that little prat, the rock that's a prat, and to take down the unhealthy, evil, klal, large man of Goliath. He knows the point of destruction for him. He's able to wait for that time. He doesn't take Shaul's armor because it's uncomfortable, doesn't need it. He goes and he focuses that. However, Malchus Gevura, David HaMelech feigns illness. He waits and waits and waits. He has tremendous patience for waiting for the right time in order to strike. How does this relate to us? I committed to giving lessons for each of the midos here, the combinations. So I understand Yesod and Sefiras to be very visual midos. That's why it says Yosef saw about creation and going beyond the self. Netzach and Gevura I understand to be auditory factual, and Hod and Chesed I understand to be kinesthetic, physical, comparing physical items. This leaves Malchus with what's called Keser. So you have Das for the visual ones, you have Bina for the kinesthetic ones, you have Chochma for the auditory, which all makes sense. God willing, I will elaborate in the future. Malchus is with Keser. So as we said, all the pratim are in the crown. I would describe this as, I want to call it ego filter for now. So people with Midas and Malchus, they always run the information through what they think. Now we all kind of do that, but they really, really, really have to say what they think, assert, push the envelope, which is to say, if someone's really pushy and they think the whole universe is themselves, that is their ego just running amok, and it's a turnoff. But at the right time, we do need to filter the entire Klal Yisrael through one thought process, one ego, because if you have all this democratic stuff, it certainly prevents tyranny. It certainly gives people individual rights. But at the end of the day, people get aggressive and take advantage. So, in terms of our lesson, many, many times as a therapist, people really forget their opinion. They abdicate themselves for their partner who's aggressive. It's absolutely important for us to think, what do I want? And someone's parents might put tremendous pressure on them to conform to a certain, yeshiva, a certain college standards, and that can destroy the self, the healthy ego. A person can only survive and be happy if they are going forward with their own self. And we do have to compromise, of course. Gevura Sheba Malchus, we do have to balance that with not, dominating others. We have to humble ourselves and perhaps, well, absolutely, get a job we don't like for a certain amount of time. So there are many instances we have to balance ourself and the world. But if we totally get rid of ourselves, we will be depressed and controlled. If we only think about ourselves, we'll be egotistical. So that there's a balance there, and it has to be found. That is some deep lessons here. Another lesson for Gevura Sheba Malchus that directly relates to David HaMelech is the fact that Evan Masu Habonam Haisel Rosh Pina, he was despised as a person. I can bring multiple parts of the text over here. His father didn't even think that he was the one that was going to be king. His brothers are saying, "What are you doing here? You just came to see the war. You didn't come here to fight. What are you doing?" So over and over, he's despised as a building. By way of analogy, he is a despised piece in the construction site, but he ends up being the cornerstone that people need. They dislike his approach because he's strong, but they realize they need him. So, lesson one: when someone loses at sports, when someone loses at life, doesn't get the job, they're put upon. Number one, of course, people need to do healing through the trauma and emotional parts of them. There's a tremendous amount of trauma out there, and hurt feelings. But at the same time, someone could be happy with the participation trophy, and someone can have a chip on their shoulder. When someone has a chip on their shoulder and they've been pushed down and pushed back, the right way to encourage them is not to say you did win. The proper way to encourage them is to say, it stinks that you lost, but if you take that energy, if you take that frustration, and you tell yourself, I'm going to go get him in the future, they can go get him in the future. They can succeed. So if they lose at middle school, high school sports, if they don't get into the ideal yeshiva, etc., they can build a chip and say, you know what, Malchus, ego, I'm going to pull up myself up, my bootstraps, and I'm going to gird myself and make it even better. And then later in life, they can reach a point that's even more important. They get squashed and they lose when they're younger. We can all push forward and use the healthy ego. So within the story of Goliath, David HaMelech says to the Philistine, he says to the Plishti, you come at me with swords and javelins and spears, but I come to you, B'Shem Hashem Tzavakos Elokei Marachos Yisrael Asher Charafta. You see here, he humbles himself. He abdicates himself not to exist, to be humble, to know it's a Kadosh Baruch Hu. But then he comes after that in Pasuk Mem Vav. This day Kadosh Baruch Hu will deliver you into my hand. I will slay you. I will remove your head, etc. So he will beat him. He's confident to beat him and make a symbol to scare off the evil, disgusting Plishtim. Here's that duality again between abdication of the self, humility, and personal strength. And just to bring more analogies from research about leadership, there's something called level 5 leadership within organizational management, organizational consulting. They studied the greatest CEOs in history. There were people with very strong personal drive and to motivate others, but they also had humility behind that. And that's that. And the Torah knows this. Chazal knew this. Kadosh Baruch Hu knows this. This is the difference between Malucha and a Moshel. Do people unite under the king, and he unites them, or is it domineering? Is it awful? And that Moshel and Malucha explanation from Malbim is in Tehillim Chaf Beis Chaf Tes Be'ir Hamilim, the elaboration of the words. Okay, moving on to the next Midah. Malchus Sefiras. So where do you find symbolism, metaphor, creativity within government? That is propaganda versus patriotism. Patriotism nowadays has a bad rap with a lot of people who are patriotic, or even nationalists. There's nothing wrong with nationalists. The problem is if you're nationalist, Nazi, nationalist, socialist, controlling, nationalist, totalitarian. There's nothing wrong with being patriotic, because what you're saying is that I want this country to succeed. And I've learned from family systems therapy that if you focus on what's wrong and you beat it over people's heads, as our media and as our, evil people that are trying to divide society are wont to do, you will, self-fulfilling prophecy, you will succeed in harming what's there. You're focusing on the bad, and you're growing that. But if you focus on the good of a family, on the good of a nation, and expand that, that overcomes the small amount of cancer of the bad parts within a society. Patriotism, Sefiras of Malchus, the metaphor, the parades, and the pictures and the symbolism. The flip side is propaganda. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. George Orwell, 1984. Doublethink means the power of holding two contradictory beliefs in one's mind simultaneously and accepting both of them. 2 + 2 is 5. So complete brainwashing from the same book from Orwell. And then the book, oh, we were always at war with Eurasia. The government in lockstep with some media or all media, depending upon when you live, can present information that's not true, and people believe it. The sheeple go with it. So once again, we have to make our ears like an afarcheses. I say asnak afarcheses. The Gemara in Chagiga, you must make your ear like a millhopper. You got to have that filter. You have to think above the sheeple. Each prat has a klal shabo. Teferes klal shabo prat. Each little piece of information links into certain framings and ideologies. We have to study, and get past that. So the lesson is be careful what you believe. The lesson also is band together to fight for the people and the nation to be well. Pratim have to be tight together as with the crown. So if people use media and communication, people unite together to make sure each prat is not being exploited and brainwashed. Those pratim can unite against the king, and that's what. Listen, Paro, other leaders are worried about the masses. The government should be afraid of the people. When the government's afraid of people, you have liberty. When the people are afraid of the government, you have tyranny. I switched the two lines, so look it up in the opposite direction. But you're right. That was a famous founding father said that in a letter. So each prat needs to be reflective of the klal in a healthy way. And Malchus and Sefiras are described as Malchus Eloi, Malchus Tatai. Okay, Malchus Netzach, Malchus Hod. So Malchus Netzach, government can provide education to develop people. Malchus Hod, government can provide healing and helping for individuals. Malchus Netzach, the government must enforce values, and really society, a group, if you don't have national values, you're going to be in trouble. Different ideologies will fight, and as we say in the Shoftim podcast, culture is downstream from religion. Whatever people believe will influence the culture in terms of style and food, but it also in terms of how much do people push the envelope. If you believe in relativistic morals, that can change, and not absolute yisodos that are ruchni and immovable, then people will push the envelope to take advantage. They have their own perverse sense of justice and keep taking advantage. Achashverosh trying to make a more, inclusive country, almost democratic, but not. He's still a king, but he wants every country to be in its own language and involved. Haman says, hey, this guy's more of a politician. Haman, I'm going to take advantage. And Achashverosh is paranoid for a long time before he realizes that Haman is the bad news in the nation. So nations need values and immutable laws. Otherwise, it's only a matter of time before it erodes. Need people enforcing the laws. Hod Sheba Malchus. So Hod Sheba Malchus. Remember, Hod is that the individual is chashuv without the prat. So here we have civil rights. The individual cannot be trampled by the government. When David HaMelech hears that his name has been besmirched, he lets it go. But when other people have their name besmirched, or people seek justice for individual crimes, he stands up and he's very humble and passionate and direct to avenge those wrongs. He needs to stand up for the kingship and the individual, but not for himself. Just let Shimi Ben Gera curse me, ream me out. It's fine. Don't even worry about that. So even though the king has eminent domain rights, he cannot trample the individual. So it says over here, a king may break through private property to make a highway. No one can protest. The king's highway has no measure. The entire nation plunders the spoils of war. They have to give it to him, the king, so he can take first. Sanhedrin, Chaf, Amud Beis. No one can sit in the temple courtyard except for the members of the kingship of David alone. The Malchus ben David, Belvad, Yuma, Samech, Tes, Amud Beis. Again, Melech or Moshe. The king has to be held back. The king can kill, but only through speaking with the Sanhedrin. In terms of individuals being trampled, David HaMelech in the story of Bathsheba and Uriah. So the Academy of Rabbi Shmuel teaches Bathsheba was fitting for David HaMelech from the 6 days of creation, but he ate an unripened fig. So she was meant to be with him, but he did this too early. Sanhedrin 107a, which is Kuf Zayin Amud Aleph. Uriah, you struck with the sword. You should have judged him with a Sanhedrin court, and you did not. the Malchus has to be in check. That's Shabbos, same source. Um, Kadosh Baruch Hu most likely would have orchestrated events so Bathsheba would marry David Melech, but David Melech sensed, or he knew, that he needed to be with her. Rava said Bathsheba was fitting from the 6 days of creation, but she came to him with great pain and ordeal instead of directly. That's Sanhedrin. So I explained this in the 7 ways, but once a king gets into king mode, he numbs his emotions and he does what's great for the kingship. So this is not just lust here. This is someone who saw something that had to happen, and he took technical means to make it happen, but he forgot about the chashivas of the individual along the way to make it legitimate. However, when David Melech is doing healthy Malchus, he's feigning illness and controlling himself and waiting to be king. Let's go to the story of Achav and Izebel. So they set up Navos HaYisraeli and take his vineyard. So again, that's the incorrect eminent domain. And they do it in a way where they don't just smite him down. They actually use witnesses. This is really analogous to what really advanced governments, especially today, do, setting people up. It's a different type of crime here. But once again, it's trampling on the individual for the sake of the Malchus. So in terms of our lesson, we have to remember our values and maintain our self. Protection and connection to Ruchnius, which is good for us. So the Netzach of our ego, it's good for us to be connected to the Ruchnius, to the Torah, to the Emes, in terms of maintaining ourself. That's one component of the self, the analytic mind and the connection to Ruchnius, and maintaining ourselves as a unique individual. It's extremely important. So again, think about your personality, your being. Are you balancing yourself with the world? Yesod Sheba Malchus. Next step. The best ways to fix issues and restructure is against our will. It's hard to hear that, but that's what will be with Malchus Beis David Mashiach. The downside is, as we mentioned, Izebel and Achav getting rid of Navos, high-level government corruption. Okay. Yesod is all of the pratim coming together. So where do you see all of the components coming together in order to be within the Malchut, keep the Malchut tight? We see this, that David Melech is the cornerstone, the keystone that needs to be in place. So interestingly, the source for David Melech being the Malchus, the kingly part of the Jewish people, based on the pasuk in Zechariah, Yud, Dalid, among the Jewish people are cornerstones. This is David Melech, as it says, Evan, Masu Abonam Haisalosh Pina, the builders despise the rock that the builders despise has become the cornerstone. Tehillim 118:22 and Shemos Rabbah Lamed Zion Aleph. The source for David Melech being the kingly, the Malchus part of the nation, is the idea that the rock becomes the keystone. Just parenthetically, there are Kabbalistic sources that I can share that he is connected to Malchus, but in terms of the classical Tanakh and Midrash here, it's interesting to note that the cornerstone is David Melech. The king is the despised rock that is inevitably used as the all-important cornerstone of the structure of Israel. David Melech is despised, meaning people think he's a very difficult personality to deal with because he's so strong and direct. But when he's put in the right place, he becomes a beautiful stone that holds an entire structure together, as the Meforshim say in Mikros Gedolos on Navi. And you can see this stone prominently from all sides. And it's beautiful. As such, at the end of the day, Malchus is indispensable. It holds society together. Malchus becomes suddenly popular and accepted. Malchus can be seen as a keystone based on the Radak and Tehillim in the same place. It's just like people who make the corners of a house with a big, beautiful stone to keep and maintain the stones of the building. Keep and maintain. You hear that? It's like a keystone where there's an arch and you need that stone right there in the middle at the top. But you don't really know it until you get there and it has a different shape. It is not misshapen, it has the perfect shape. So, in order to bring all the parts in together, we have to accept that we need something strong above us. And in order to fully integrate ourselves, the lesson is to integrate ourselves, we have to be able to pull all of our parts together. When we integrate ourselves, we have less impulses. For example, when people say, "Oh, I can't stop eating, drinking, drugs, this and that," it's not usually a matter of self-control. It's a matter of what's eating you. We have stuff that's eating us. If it's trauma, if it's stress, if it's family issues, if it's conflict, these things are all bothering us, the past and the present. Worry about the future. If we can do the work to eliminate those things, we can integrate ourselves in terms of our talents, in terms of our focus, our stamina, our output, our body, left leg, right leg, our feelings, our thoughts, our behaviors. We must integrate all of our components to be fully whole, to be the melech over our body, our domain. And the Malchus is the head. All the limbs are connected, but when those neurotransmitters and neurons are firing in your brain, that's what dictates how you feel and what you do in your body. The Malchus is the brain. Brain is the Malchus. We must fully integrate ourselves. Malchus Sheb Malchus, we finally come to the end of this beautiful journey in preparation for Shavuos. Malchus, a completely controlled, integrated person or group is able to integrate and lead what is around it. The more integrated and holistic a person is, the more they can influence and lead. Malchus needs Malchus. When Shmuel saw David HaMelech, who was red-colored, Admoni, Shmuel was afraid. He said, this person too will be a spiller of blood, like Esau. I parenthetically say, this is that expression of Malchus, that if it's too broad, it's hurtful at the wrong time. That's the dominating, aggressive blood Malchus. Back to the Midrash, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to him, David has beautiful eyes. This means that Esau murdered by his own decision. But David HaMelech will only kill, not murder, he'll kill, with the decision of the Sanhedrin. His eyes will be on the Sanhedrin. I added that in at the end. That's Bereshis Rabbah, Samech, Gimel, Ches. So, David HaMelech, as a fully integrated person, the Melech Malchus, will consult with the Malchus. I add in here, Shlomo HaMelech, interestingly, there's a famous Gemara in Gittin, Samech Ches, with Ashmedai, the king of the demons. I hope, God willing, to do a series on that, or a long podcast. Very powerful story. Shlomo HaMelech is somehow, some way, ousted from his kingdom, and he comes back. And in order to keep himself not afraid of Ashmedai anymore, or at least keeping him away, he has people wielding swords around him. But the Gemara in Sanhedrin says they were wielding the sword of Torah. They were well versed in all the Torah. I understand from there that Shlomo HaMelech had a cabinet to help him, Malchus with Malchus. So this means that, even though he's the king, he's nimlach. He's taking advice from others and asking them advice because he erred in terms of those 3 laws that a king is not supposed to violate. He had reasons for them, the logic, but this supra logic is incorrect. The Torah is immutable, so he had that cabinet to be nimlach from, to speak and take advice, to protect himself, to keep himself on track. Malchus within Malchus. The personal lesson, after we bring all of our parts together to integrate ourselves, we have to keep those disparate parts tightly together within us. We need to be vigilant about what is going to harm our body. Our body is our kingdom. We must keep those things at bay to protect ourselves from physical harm, lack of health, from stress, from verbal abuse, from interpersonal stress, from future pain and trauma. It's okay. We're allowed to. It is promoted to protect the self, to promote yourself. So we've come full circle here. We started out with the most basic elements of creation and malleable substances, and we come to a benevolent king. That is really the best government. We can't handle it now. We have these strange combinations of democracy, republics, kingships around the world. None of them are working. Not only will Mashiach save us from the awful events of the world, but he will be able to stop the corruption and the strong arming that comes with the Yesod society. Achashverosh and Haman. There's going to be a Mashiach ben Yosef to bring in the sixth step, to unite the parts, and Mashiach ben David to keep those parts tight to save us. They're both essential. You cannot just have the strength. Remember the Osnil ben Kanaz. You can't just have that flash in the pan strength. There has to be a building up of all the steps. Stop people from taking advantage. The Malchus will finally, God willing, root out the evil, unite the governments of the world. He will give us surveillance that's balanced. He will shore up the loopholes. And Shavuos is coming. Rus, we go from Rus to David HaMelech. The traits are similar. Rus is absolutely determined to reach her goal of being Jewish and married, and she had no self. The baby was Naomi's. It's the most wild thing you could ever hear. This woman, finally Jewish, finally married, and she gives her baby to Naomi. She abdicates herself. But those are the mitos of David HaMelech, and why he comes from that, because he has absolute determination combined with humility, acknowledging Kadosh Baruch Hu, and no self. So my blessing to you all is that you will be able to take all of the lessons of the Sefiros and to integrate them inside of yourself, to be whole, and that tikkun that you do will help us all bring Mashiach at the right time in the right place as we build up our steps. You're all in my thoughts. I hope you enjoyed this series. God willing, I might do some polishing or some tweaking. Let me know if you have any advice for me. We always take constructive criticism, and we look forward to doing new innovations. I hope you all have. Feel free to send any comments or questions to Rabbi Bailey at the7ways.com. No number, it's all written out.